Here's where I'm getting at. I was advised, and I'm hoping that you could clarify if you know, that the 3 Hacker reports and the Morris report were all paid for, or companies were retained by an oil company to make those estimates. So do you have any idea if that's accurate or not?
I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm not sure who actually employed Hacker or Morris, Height, and all the other reports. I assume that those reports, though, were funded in part by an oil company to come up with an estimate of how much oil was in the ground. I don't know if it was for the company itself to actually rely on to make those, to actually go forward and drill, or if it was based in part on some of the issues with state lands at the time. I don't know.
You indicated that there's very little actual data, but then referred to the fact that there is the new Redondo Beach data. If you had the Redondo Beach data that we now have today, would you have used it in your CBA analysis?
Probably not. I think there was too much of a time constraint of finishing up the CBA report to do another, in effect, another study on top of the one that was being performed in the CBA. It was a decision to go with what data we had available to us at the time. If you're asking if I could use that production data on top of it all, I don't think that we had a sufficient amount of time to utilize all that information. No. I don't think it would have changed how we approached the report.
So my question goes to, if you had the data that's available now, the newly released information, would you have used that data to conduct your CBA analysis? Like when you started the whole process?
No. We would still do the analysis the same way. The production data on top of all that, it would have, like I said, it would have been a decision at that time of exactly how to go forward with the study, whether you use the geological information or you'd use production information or both. But to do both, I don't think there was a sufficient amount of time to do both at the same time.
Did the city provide you any oil volume estimate reports for your review to consider for the cost-benefit analysis?
No.
Did you review any of the reports that were done by the city's trial experts in preparing the CBA? And if not, why?
We just recently, within the past week, have received the information from the depositions, so it was not utilized. And again, the RFP was to do an independent analysis. It was not to utilize other reports to come up with a recoverable oil in place number.
Well, you used Hacker and Morris.
No, they were not used. They were just cited in the report. And then Terra was also, in effect, just cited in the report. It was not utilized in the CBA estimates. Just the raw data or just the raw information for any of those reports would be the same information that everyone would have used.
This is in regards to recovery. In Redondo Beach, they drilled for 35 years about the same number of wells and only recovered about 5 million barrels, correct? Roughly?
Correct, roughly. Your question was how much oil was recovered in the 35 or so wells offshore Redondo Beach, and I believe you said about 5 million barrels, and I said, yes, that's approximately, I think it was 5.2, but yes, approximately 5 million barrels.
Okay, what new information do you have that the same number of wells over the same number of time in Hermosa is going to produce up to about 6 times more oil here than was able to be recovered in Redondo?
Okay, the wells for the offshore Redondo were drilled 50s, 60s, and 70s. They had a similar time constraint put on them. There's a couple issues with trying to use strictly that production information and and utilize it to come up with the same sort of estimates for Hermosa Beach. In part, at least you have a bottom number you can kind of conjecture would be, but the conditions and when those wells are drilled, we're talking the 50s on some of those and 60s, and it's been a few years ago. First of all, completion practices, drilling practices have changed. How much, but probably a bigger problem with utilizing that data directly without trying to put some more interpretive work into it is that how much money was invested and I'm not talking about just drilling, but how much money was invested on a daily basis to maintain those wells at optimum production. And because we're talking about oil price of $10 a barrel and at times lower than that, and so there wasn't as much capital as there is now. If all those wells are drilled today, and how much capital would go into maintaining those wells, I don't even have to guess. I would know that they would recover a larger quantity of oil than what they ended up with, just about 5 million barrels.
I lost a little bit of you during the response, so I just want to make sure you didn't cover this. Did you indicate there's better technology now, as opposed to just the fact that the price back then was lower, therefore there was less of incentive, for lack of a better analogy?
I'm going to turn this question kind of the opposite way around. So if during the 50s, 60s, 70s, if oil price was $100 a barrel, and doesn't matter how much they produced, and today it was $10 a barrel, I don't think you could make the same assumptions, is that they wouldn't be recovering, or Hermosa wouldn't be recovering as much oil as Redondo.
Okay, I'll just ask one more question. I'm sorry, this will be my last question. The Redondo numbers, they were actually, Redondo actually drilled on the Hermosa-Redondo border, and I think even in one of the reports indicates that at the time Redondo recovered some of Hermosa's numbers. But wouldn't the numbers in the northern part of Hermosa, or the drilling that occurred on the Hermosa border, have relevance to what is expected to be recovered in Hermosa?
Maybe. No, I understand what you say. So the question would be, do you want to rely on those 5 or 6 wells right along the Hermosa-Redondo Beach border as determining the entire oil volume for Hermosa Beach? I mean, yes, you could do that. Does that mean that all those wells right along the border will equate to any well drilled in Hermosa? No, it will not. I cannot tell you, one of the beginning point slides here is that I cannot tell you what the geology looks another 100 feet into Hermosa from that border. It could change for the better, change for the worse, be exactly the same. I basically just not quite sure. There are certain parameters in coming up with oil in place numbers that everyone's going to use, and those are not necessarily set in stone, but there are certain parameters. I just can't tell you whether those wells right along that border are going to be indicative throughout either the uplands or the tidelands of Hermosa Beach.
Okay, thank you.